They lied to you from day one. Not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear that you would discover too soon that the door was never locked. That you didn't need to bleed, or beg, or crawl before the invisible. That the mistake wasn't in you, it was in the method they taught you to repeat like an empty mantra. I know this because I have walked where you still hesitate. I have read manuscripts that don't fit into Sunday sermons. I have compared gospels that have never met in the same pulpit. I have seen the contradictions that have been softened, the silences that have been converted into dogmas, the margins erased because there was too much fire in them. And now I am here to guide you through these cracks, where the canon crumbles and something ancient, older than religion itself, begins to breathe again. Imagine, for a moment, a reinforced door in front of you. You know this scene. For years you've banged on it with wounded fists, your voice broken from pleading. You've prayed in dark rooms, in crowded churches, in moments of utter despair. Nothing moved. No answer. No sign that lasted more than a few seconds of hope. And in silence you concluded, maybe I don't deserve it. Maybe God doesn't hear me. Maybe heaven is closed. This conclusion was planted in you. Official traditions have taught you to confuse humility with powerlessness, to approach mystery as one who asks permission to exist. But when you carefully read the texts that escaped the scissors of the councils, when you compare translations that have not been filtered by centuries of institutional power, something strange appears: the figure of a man who does not plead, who does not negotiate, who does not bow before the invisibly speaks as one who recognizes something that has always been there. When Jesus raises his voice before Lazarus' tomb, there is no despair in the original text. There is certainty. He gives thanks before any miracle happens. He doesn't ask for permission. He affirms a connection that cannot be broken. This is not modern theology. It is in the fragments that few read, in the subtext that almost no one dares to touch. Why didn't anyone teach you this? Because the entire structure of the religious world depends on your sense of distance. Distance between you and the source. Distance between you and power. Distance between you and truth. The greater this distance, the more you depend on intermediaries. The more you depend, the easier it is to control. And I'm not just talking about churches. I'm talking about an entire system of language, symbols, and rituals designed to keep you in a state of eternal supplication. The word prayer has been emptied of meaning, transformed into a request. But in the oldest layers of mystical thought, it doesn't mean to beget, means to align, to remember, to activate. Perhaps you've felt this before. That strange static when you try to connect with something bigger. As if the connection is always about to complete, but an invisible noise crosses the line. You concentrate, repeat memorized phrases, close your eyes tightly and nothing. Just exhaustion. This noise is not your fault. It's interference. I discovered this when I realized that certain texts disappeared precisely at the points where the human being ceased to be a servant and became sovereign. Entire passages omitted, terms replaced, concepts softened. Where there was once command, now there is request. Where there was once recognition, now there is guilt. Where there was once power, now there is fear. You weren't created to live begging for a better place inside prison. You were created to remember that the cell was never designed to contain you. And hey, race the part almost no one wants to hear: the universe doesn't respond to your pain. It responds to your frequency. It doesn't move out of pity. It reconfigures itself through compatibility. The plea generates an echo. Alignment generates a response. I'm not here to offer you comfort. I'm here to give you back responsibility. Because the moment you understand that you're not speaking to a distant king, but to an origin of which you yourself are a fragment, the entire narrative is reversed. You cease to be a visitor and become an heir. Read carefully: an heir doesn't beg. An heir acknowledges. In the middle of this video, before that old doubt tries to pull you back into automatic mode, I want you to do something simple. Write in the comments: I activate the monad. It's not for the algorithm. It's for you. It's the first time, perhaps in your entire life, that you won't be asking for anything. You'll be declaring. Perhaps your mind is trying to defend itself now. Perhaps you're thinking this is too much symbolism, too much mystery, too many beautiful words. I've thought that too. Until I understood that words aren't the codethir, just the packaging. The real code is hidden in what you've been trained to ignore, in the sudden feeling of recognition, in that causeless shiver, in that heavy silence that sometimes invades your chest without warning. This presence doesn't come from outside. It emerges from something that was never born. And that's exactly why the next part is going to be uncomfortable. Because to move forward, you'll have to accept that there are two types of consciousness occupying this reality, and that maybe, just maybe, you don't belong to the group you've always been told you belong to. You may have turned off this video before when something similar was said. Maybe you thought it sounds nice, but it's far removed from your real life, your routine of bills, traffic, unanswered messages, and that persistent feeling of always chasing something that never arrives. I understand. I too have lived in that rhythm of silent survival, where the miracle is paying everything at the end of the month and still having enough energy left to smile at those around you. That's exactly where the mistake begins to reveal itself. Because the misconception isn't just in grand temples or ancient books. It's in how you've been trained to interpret your own daily experience. Notice the pattern: when something goes wrong, you think you failed; when something goes right, you're grateful as if you've received a rare favor; when nothing happens, you feel forgotten. This cycle seems natural, but it's not neutral. It shapes your perception of the world so that you always see yourself as someone reacting, never as someone participating in the construction. The manuscripts I studied outside the mainstream describe a different logic. They don't speak of a universe that distributes rewards and punishments, but of a field that organizes itself according to the type of presence it encounters. And presence is not blind faith or artificial positivity. It is coherence between what you feel, think, and hold as intimate truth. The everyday world you know, with its delays, broken promises, and small collapses, is not proof that you are being punished. It is a symptom that something is operating out of sync. Think about how many times you've woken up with the feeling that the day was going to go wrong. There wasn't a clear reason, just a silent expectation. And somehow, small things started to align to confirm that impression. The coffee spilled, the phone froze, someone responded coldly. None of this is magic. It's mechanical. Not in the technical sense, but in the deepest human sense. You entered the day as someone who expects the impact, not as someone who recognizes possibility. Ancient texts call this state inner exile. It's not being far from God, it's being far from oneself. It's living as if you were merely a passenger within your own story. I found this concept in fragments that are almost never quoted, where the word miracle doesn't appear as a spectacle, but as a return to the original alignment. Nothing explodes. Nothing tears the sky. Things simply fall back into place. Perhaps you can relate to this when you recall moments when everything seemed to flow effortlessly. A meeting that happened on the exact day you needed to hear something. A decision made without much analysis that later proved to be the best possible one. A problem that simply dissolved without confrontation. These experiences don't fit into the traditional narrative of cause and effect, so you call them coincidence. I call them loopholes. The world we live in is efficient at convincing you that these loopholes are rare. That you need more preparation, more discipline, more obedience to external methods. But when I compare the texts that have survived on the margins of official history, what I find is something else: the insistence that the original error was not moral, but perceptual. The world supposedly arose from a misreading of the source itself, and we inherited this distorted reading as if it were the truth. That's why you feel, even without being able to explain it, that something is out of place. You notice when a conversation ends with a strange feeling, when success doesn't bring satisfaction, when a victory doesn't fulfill you. It's not ingratitude. It's memory. Something inside you recognizes that this isn't everything. I want you to think now about a simple situation, something you've experienced. You send an important message and stare at the screen, waiting for a reply. Minutes turn into hours. Your mind starts creating stories. You review every word, every emoji, trying to guess the mistake. This small everyday drama sums up almost all of modern spirituality. You spoke, now you wait. And while you wait, you weaken. The writings that brought me here don't describe this process as waiting, but as misalignment. It's not that the answer won't come, it's that the way you position yourself already presupposes separation. It's like calling someone believing that perhaps there's no one on the other end. Doubt itself distorts communication. This perception changes everything when you start to observe your routine with different eyes. Traffic ceases to be just a delay and becomes a backdrop for how you react to what you cannot control. Work ceases to be just an obligation and becomes a field of tension between what you feel and what you do. Even the silence of a Sunday night takes on a different color. It is not empty, it is an invitation. And this is where the narrative takes a turn. Because it's not enough to understand that the world was built on a misconception. The hardest part is accepting that you've learned to live comfortably within that error. That the feeling of always being chased has become familiar. That, in a way, you've come to trust frustration more than the real possibility of change. In the next part, I will guide you beyond this diagnosis. You will discover that not everyone operates under the same logic of consciousness, and that perhaps your restlessness is not a defect, but a sign that you do not entirely belong to this pattern. A solitary Jesus stands at the edge of a crowded ancient marketplace, everyone around him blurred into ghost-like motion trails while he remains sharply still, floating dust forming a faint spiral above, everyday life turned uncanny, surreal, dark, dreamlike, painterly, no text. 169. Jesus walking along a narrow stone street in ancient Jerusalem under heavy rain that falls upward into the sky, merchants' lanterns flickering like dying stars, the mundane world subtly inverted, somber surrealism, cinematic, no text. 169. Inside a humble clay-walled room, Jesus watches a small oil lamp whose flame splits into two colors, casting impossible shadows that resemble unseen observers, intimate everyday setting with mystical tension, painterly, no text. 169. Jesus seated by a simple wooden table with bread and a clay cup, while the room's walls reveal faint layers of hidden symbols beneath plaster like buried manuscripts, quiet revelation mood, surreal, dark, no text. 169. A close wide shot of Jesus near a stone well in a village courtyard, the water surface behaving like glass and reflecting a different sky than above, subtle breach in reality, contemplative, oniric, no text. 169. Jesus standing in a busy caravan road at dusk, travelers frozen mid-step like statues while sand flows around them like liquid, signaling time suspended, mysterious and ominous, painterly, no text. 169. In an ancient temple corridor, Jesus passes carved columns that appear normal at first glance, but their shadows form hidden faces and fractured halos, suggesting an unseen system watching, surreal, dark, cinematic, no text. 169. Jesus looking at a parchment scroll in torchlight, the ink lifts off the page as glowing particles and rearranges into abstract constellations above his hands, secret knowledge emerging, dreamlike pictorial style, no text. 169. A night scene where Jesus stands beneath a star-filled sky, and a thin vertical tear of light opens in the air behind him like a silent portal, everyday desert horizon made impossible, eerie and sacred, no text. 169. Jesus in an ordinary village gathering, faces around him calm yet subtly hollowed, while a faint golden aura pulses from his chest, hinting at inner coherence against a distorted world, symbolic, somber, surreal, no text. 169. You begin to realize that the discomfort that has always accompanied you is neither ordinary sadness nor isolated anxiety. It's a kind of misalignment, as if you were using a language you weren't born to speak. It took me years to recognize this inner noise because it doesn't scream. It simply insists, silently, on reminding you that something within you doesn't fit perfectly into the script you were given. In the marginal texts that survived library burnings and revisions of convenience, there is a distinction almost never commented on. Not all consciousness responds to the world in the same way. Some live in a state of permanent reaction, shaped by external stimuli, regulated by fear, reward, scarcity. Others, rare and almost always restless, carry a sense of displacement that is not resolved by social success or religious devotion. It was by comparing contradictory versions of the same episodes that I perceived the pattern. Where the canon speaks of obedience, the fragments speak of remembrance. Where the official text describes submission, the parallels describe recognition. These are not merely different words, they are opposing mental architectures, as if two humanities were occupying the same stage, but operating under incompatible codes. Have you ever felt that your unease doesn't fit into the explanations you're given? There are people who adapt to the world as it is presented. They quickly learn what is expected of them, build identity from roles, and find comfort in repetition. There is nothing wrong with that. The system was designed to accommodate this type of awareness. But there is another type, quieter and less predictable, that never feels completely at home, even when everything seems to be working. This difference is not measured by intelligence or faith, but by perception. I've seen this manifest in mundane scenes. A woman in a modern office, surrounded by screens and deadlines, told me that sometimes she feels like crying for no reason while looking at a report. A student wrote to me saying that, amidst colleagues excited about the future, he feels as if he's trapped inside a dream he didn't choose. These accounts aren't symptoms of weakness, they're clues that something is operating on deeper levels than we usually admit. In Gnostic manuscripts, this division appears under other names, but the essence is the same. There are consciousnesses molded entirely by matter, and there are those that carry a sense of origin that is not exhausted by form. This is not a moral hierarchy. It is a difference in the interpretation of reality, as if some perceive only the surface while others grasp, albeit vaguely, the structure behind the image. What if this feeling of not belonging wasn't a flaw, but a type of memory? The problem begins when you try to live according to codes that don't correspond to your inner self. You end up constantly correcting yourself, adapting to narratives that never fully resonate. This generates existential fatigue, a weariness that isn't resolved by vacations or job changes. It's the exhaustion of maintaining an identity that doesn't align with who you sense you are. Traditional religion offers temporary relief because it transforms this tension into guilt or a trial. They say you suffer because you don't believe enough, you don't pray the right way, you don't surrender as you should. But when you confront this with texts that have escaped the filter, the meaning changes. Suffering doesn't appear as punishment, but as friction between layers of reality that weren't designed to operate together. It was at this point that I found myself forced to stop searching for external answers. I realized that every time I tried to explain my unease using ready-made formulas, something retreated within me, as if I were betraying an ancient intuition in exchange for immediate comfort. Have you ever wondered how many times you've silenced a perception just to better fit into the world? This friction manifests itself in small choices. You accept invitations you don't want, stay in relationships that don't make sense, consume content that doesn't nourish you, all to preserve the feeling of normalcy. But the price of this is high. You become an expert at ignoring internal signals. Not because they disappear, but because you learn to suppress them. The fragments I studied describe this process as a form of progressive amnesia. It's not about forgetting facts, but about forgetting one's own position in the larger narrative. Consciousness begins to identify only with the social role, losing contact with a dimension that doesn't depend on function or external recognition. It's like living in a huge house using only one room. Perhaps that's why certain encounters affect you so deeply. Someone says a seemingly simple phrase, and it resonates with you for days. You watch a scene in a movie and feel there's something there that you can't quite name. These reactions aren't random. They're points of resonance, moments where the conventional narrative fails to fully capture what you perceive. How many times have you felt something profound and given up investigating for fear of seeming strange? The modern world dislikes questions without immediate answers. It prefers solutions, methods, results. But the perspective that emerges from these texts is different. There are questions that cannot be resolved, only deepened. And the more you avoid them, the more they return disguised as dissatisfaction, boredom, a melancholy without a clear cause. That is why the division between types of consciousness does not appear in statistics or public discourse. It manifests itself inwardly, in the way each person relates to silence, choice, and meaning. Some feel secure with ready-made structures. Others, even when they master them, continue searching for cracks. In the next part, I'll guide you to the point where this difference ceases to be just a diagnosis and begins to transform into practice. Because recognizing that you don't read the world like most people isn't the end of the journey, it's just the moment when the question changes shape. And when the question changes, everything around it begins to reorganize itself. At some point, you'll realize that understanding the difference between types of consciousness doesn't solve anything on its own. On the contrary, it increases the tension. It's like discovering that there's always been a secret exit from your house, but nobody told you where the door is. It was at this point that I started looking for accounts that didn't appear in books or classes, only in hallway conversations, in old letters forgotten in archives, and in confessions made late at night, when rational defenses were too tired to pretend that everything was under control. One such account came from a manuscript translator who spent decades reconstructing erased texts. He told me that certain words were systematically replaced with gentler terms over the centuries. Where there was once a verb indicating to assume, dominate, or establish, another appeared that meant to ask, wait, or await. This exchange did not seem random. It silently reprogrammed how the reader saw themselves within the story. The text no longer said recognize, it said await. It no longer said activate, it said trust. It's a small difference on the surface, but gigantic in the mind. Another episode that struck me came from a doctor who worked for years in isolated communities. He observed that, in certain villages, people with few material resources recovered faster from simple illnesses than patients in urban centers full of technology. It wasn't a miracle or a lack of diagnosis. It was an inner attitude. These people didn't see themselves as passive victims of their bodies. They spoke of themselves as an active part of a process. When something wasn't right, they didn't say my body betrayed me, but something went wrong. The language you use to describe your own condition changes how you experience it. There are also the improbable events that no one likes to talk about because they challenge the comfortable narrative of chance. People who escape accidents by seconds, encounters that change an entire life without warning, seemingly irrational decisions that later prove to be perfectly aligned. These events are labeled as luck or destiny so that we can move on without questioning the mechanism behind them. But when you start cross-referencing stories, you notice subtle patterns. They almost always involve an unusual state of presence, a moment when the person wasn't trying to control anything, just existing fully. What is almost never discussed is that this presence is not born from faith or effort. It arises when the layers of conditioning give way for a few moments. I have felt this a few times, and there is nothing spectacular about it. No light in the sky, no voice. Just a feeling of being exactly where I should be, without urgency, without calculation. Curiously, it is in these moments that life seems to move on its own, as if someone had discreetly adjusted the gears from within. It was by cross-referencing these accounts that I understood that the three keys I mentioned before are not abstract concepts. They manifest themselves in mundane situations. Recognition happens when you stop defining yourself solely by the role you play. Authority emerges when you stop internally negotiating with fear. Command is revealed when you act without needing to convince yourself. A retired professor once wrote to me, recounting how he had spent his entire life feeling out of place until, at age 60, he decided to sell his house and move to a coastal village he had never been to. There was no plan, no promise of financial improvement. He simply knew he needed to leave. 2 years later, he described the experience as if he had finally learned to breathe. He didn't get rich, he didn't become a guru, but something clicked. The curious thing is that he doesn't speak of the decision as an act of courage, but as a moment when he stopped arguing with himself. These stories don't appear in motivational speeches because they don't fit into formulas. They point to a type of internal movement that cannot be taught as a technique. You don't train recognition, you allow it. You don't force authority, you stop abandoning it. You don't execute a command, you stop sabotaging it. Perhaps that's why so many people get frustrated when trying to change their lives using external methods. They adopt routines, affirm phrases, follow rigid plans, but still feel that something essential hasn't been touched. It's not a lack of discipline. It's excessive interference. The attempt to control every step keeps the mind too occupied to perceive the real change in position. I myself had to go through an uncomfortable period where nothing seemed solid. Old certainties crumbled, but no new ones had yet taken hold. It was like walking across an invisible bridge over a conceptual abyss. During that time, I understood why so many give up. The void between one identity and another offers no guarantees, only the feeling that you can no longer go back to being who you were. But that's exactly where the narrative begins to reverse. Not with grand revelations, but with small shifts. A thought that no longer arises. An automatic reaction that loses its power. A conversation that doesn't happen because you don't feel the need to prove anything. These are microscopic, yet cumulative changes. They create space. Ancient texts do not promise comfort at this stage. They speak of transition, of exile, of a gentle but inevitable rupture. Not as punishment, but as reorganization. When you change the way you perceive yourself, the reality around you needs to adjust, and this adjustment is rarely silent. In the next part, I will show how this adjustment begins to manifest itself concretely, with signs that most people ignore or misinterpret. Because when the internal gears shift, the world doesn't respond with applause. It responds with displacement. And it is in this displacement that almost everyone gets lost. Have you ever noticed that the more something starts to align internally, the more the world around you seems to resist? Not with visible attacks, but with small delays, noise, misunderstandings, as if reality were testing how much you truly trust what you've begun to change. It's at this point that almost everyone retreats. Not due to a lack of ability, but due to misinterpretation. They confuse friction with failure. I experienced this when I decided to stop translating texts just to understand words and started observing them as guidance systems. In the following days, everything that was stable began to shift. People I relied on disappeared without explanation. Projects that seemed solid lost support. None of this was accompanied by epic drama, just the persistent feeling that the ground was less predictable. It was then that I understood that reorganization doesn't begin by offering shelter, it begins by removing support. Perhaps you are experiencing something similar right now. A conversation that didn't happen, a plan that didn't hold up, a feeling of strangeness in places that were once comfortable. You might interpret this as bad luck, but ancient texts point to another interpretation. When the internal situation changes, the external scenario needs to rearrange itself, and this rarely happens without disruption. What's most disturbing is that this noise doesn't present itself as a clear threat. It disguises itself as reasonable doubt. It arises as logical thought. Are you exaggerating? Isn't this just another phase? Wouldn't it be better to go back to what worked before? This inner voice is skillful because it sounds protective. It doesn't tell you to give up, it tells you to be prudent. And that's how almost everyone aborts their own change process without realizing it. Once, a woman wrote to me saying that, after months of feeling out of place at work, she decided to quit without having another plan. In the following days, she lost part of her income, argued with family members, and began to question her own sanity. Everything seemed to confirm that she had made a mistake. But she didn't back down. She maintained her stance of not reacting out of fear. 3 weeks later, she received an unexpected invitation to join a project that combined exactly the skills she felt were wasted. There was no visible miracle, just the silent replacement of one structure with another more coherent with what she possessed. What almost no one tells you is that this interval between falling and fitting in is the most sensitive territory of the entire journey. It's there that you miss the old certainties, even knowing that they no longer serve you. It's there that the world seems devoid of direction, as if you were suspended between two maps that don't overlap. The fragments I studied describe this period as a state of latency. It's not passive waiting, it's background reorganization. The mistake is trying to fill this space hastily, seeking shortcuts to regain a sense of control. Every time you do that, you reactivate the old pattern and prolong the cycle. Have you ever noticed how, when something collapses, the first reaction is to rush to save what's left? Forwarding messages, justifying choices, over-explaining. All of this has a hidden objective to restore the image you had of yourself before the displacement. But that image no longer corresponds to what you've begun to perceive. The effort to preserve it consumes more energy than the journey itself. For me, this stage manifested as silence. Not that comfortable silence of rest, but a strange silence, where words lose their weight. Friends asked what I was planning, and I had no answer. Not because I was lost, but because the answer did not yet exist in a communicable form. For the first time, there was no need to convince anyone. This is the turning point that doesn't appear in self-help books. They talk about continuous action, constant movement, but ignore the importance of enduring the pause. Without it, you're just changing scenery while keeping the same center. Perhaps now you're waiting for some external sign, something to confirm that you're on the right track. This expectation is understandable, but it's also the last vestige of the old model, the one that teaches that validation always comes from the outside. The texts that have survived on the margins suggest the opposite. The most reliable sign is the change in your relationship with your own uncertainty. When you stop trying to fill every gap with explanations, something stabilizes. This doesn't mean everything gets easier. On the contrary, tension increases for a while. People drift away, opportunities disappear, routines fall apart. The world seems smaller and more unstable. That's when many conclude they were wrong from the start. But, if you observe carefully, you'll see that the discomfort doesn't come from the loss itself, but from the habit of defining oneself by what has been lost. There's a specific moment, difficult to pinpoint on a calendar, when this tension changes its nature. It's not when everything is resolved, but when you realize you no longer need to fight against the void. It ceases to be a threat and becomes space. The absence of direction transforms into openness. In the next part, you will understand how to recognize this moment and why it is not accompanied by euphoria, but by a profound, almost strange neutrality that most people mistake for discouragement. It is precisely there that the outcome begins to take shape. When everything that was solid begins to lose its shape and you no longer rush to fill every void, a rare kind of silence emerges. It's not peace in the romantic sense, nor euphoria. It's a neutral, almost impersonal state, as if you were finally breathing without asking permission from your own fear. It was at this point that I understood that none of the previous parts made sense if they couldn't be translated into something simple, applicable, lived amidst the routine you know so well. Because you're not going to leave here for a cave or an ancient temple. You're going back to the same house, the same job, the same people. The difference won't be in the scenery, but in the inner attitude with which you navigate these spaces. The journey we undertake isn't about escaping the world, but about ceasing to see ourselves as someone who merely reacts to it. The first practical step is almost invisible. Observe how you start your day. Before looking at messages, news, or to-do lists, notice how you position yourself internally. Do you wake up feeling behind schedule, in debt, at a disadvantage? Or can you, for a few seconds, simply be present, without a narrative? This pause is more powerful than it seems. It interrupts the autopilot that transforms each morning into a repetition of the previous one. The second step is to review the language you use with yourself. Not aloud, but in the silent dialogue that accompanies each choice. Notice how many times you describe yourself as someone who needs to endure, bear, resist. Replace that with a simple formulation: what is being adjusted now? It's not positive thinking, it's repositioning. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of events and begin to perceive yourself as an active part of a process, even when you don't understand everything. The third step is perhaps the most difficult: sustaining the interval between intention and result. When you act from a different internal position, the world doesn't always respond immediately. Sometimes it even seems to become disorganized. Commitments change, people drift away, certainties evaporate. Instead of interpreting this as a sign of error, try reading it as reconfiguration. The absence of a quick response is not negation, it is space being created. There's something profoundly human in this moment. You begin to realize that you don't need to narrate every move to feel alive. That you don't need constant approval to trust what you feel. The neutrality we spoke of earlier manifests here as silent freedom. You continue to fulfill responsibilities, but without the old feeling that everything depends on you constantly proving yourself. As the days go by, small signs appear. Not like fireworks, but like fine adjustments. A conversation that flows differently, a decision made with less effort, a problem that doesn't take up so much mental space. These details don't seem grand, but accumulated they completely alter the way you move through the world. Perhaps you'll notice that you're starting to listen more and react less. That you're no longer over-explaining yourself. That you no longer feel such an urgent need to control what doesn't depend on you. This change doesn't eliminate challenges, but it changes your relationship with them. You no longer see them as proof of your inadequacy, but as moving parts of a system that is being reorganized. If you want to make this even more concrete, try a simple exercise at the end of each day. Before going to sleep, think of a single moment when you felt aligned, even if only for seconds. It doesn't matter how small. It could have been a minor choice, a different response, a moment of silence. This internal record creates continuity. It reminds your system that something new is being rehearsed. And then comes the most transformative part, allowing this way of being to become habitual. Not as a rigid discipline, but as intimacy with yourself. The journey that began as questioning transforms into a living practice. You stop searching for grand solutions and begin to inhabit the present with a different depth. I know you might be expecting a more spectacular ending, some final revelation that ties everything together. But the true conclusion is subtle. It happens when you close this video and, for a few moments, don't feel the need to rush to the next distraction. When you realize that something has settled, even if you can't name it. If this narrative touched you on any level, if any phrase resonated with you, take a simple step now. Like this video so that more people can find this path. Leave a comment, even anonymously, saying what changed in your perception. And subscribe to the channel, because this conversation doesn't end here. It has only just begun to take shape within you.